Every single time someone asks me how to set up binds in Rust, a small part of me dies inside. It honestly makes me want to write an entire book on this topic, and just link to it, because what should have been a simple key rebinding system was turned by the developers into an absolute nightmare. For example, if you want to manually bind opening the map not to G, but to a side mouse button, you'll have to figure out the exact internal name of that button, find the correct command for opening the map, understand its parameters, learn how command conditions work, deal with proper punctuation for different types of binds, escape quotation marks correctly, and then, once you've finally written the perfect bind, you'll discover that you could have just typed +map, and the result would have been exactly the same. In this video, I'll try to clearly and step-by-step explain how to properly write Rust binds in 2026 without completely losing your sanity in the process. This video will be mostly theoretical. I won't be listing ready-made binds. Instead, I'll teach you how to write them from scratch. If, however, you want a ready-to-use solution without all the hassle, check the first link in the description and download Rust Tweaker. It comes with a built-in library of 26 fully customizable binds. For example, a bind for an advanced console. You can not only display extra information inside the console, but also choose exactly what is shown and in what format. Want to upgrade your admin tools? No problem. Just pick what you need from the list and activate it with a single key press. All binds come with clean pop-up notifications, and automatic backups ensure you won't lose your binds even after reinstalling Windows. And this is just one tab of my program. You'll also find a simple and intuitive graphics settings menu without thousands of useless, half-dead options from the developers. Quick tweaks that let you disable those same useless settings and unnecessary animations in a single click. A tab with helpful tools and monthly updates, along with a personal support chat to help you solve any issues that may come up. Rust Tweaker is a project I fully stand behind and gladly recommend to every Rust player without exception. And if you decide to subscribe, feel free to use my promo code Woodcocker. It will increase your subscription duration by 50%. Once again, the link is in the description. And for those of you who decided to personally dive into all the details of creating binds, welcome to the video. The first thing you need to start with is the basic structure of any bind. No matter what action you want to assign to a key, a bind in Rust always follows the same format. Bind key command. At the most basic level, no punctuation is required at all. For example, bind space kill will instantly kill your character when you press the spacebar. So the very first step when creating a bind is choosing a key. Here you can see all the keys that Rust currently recognizes. And as you can tell, besides the usual and familiar buttons, there are some rather unusual ones as well, like F13, F14, and F15. Yes, technically Windows supports 2 full rows of function keys. However, Rust only reads keys up to F15. This can be very useful, for example, when creating binds through a Stream Deck, AutoHotkey, or any other keyboard emulation software. The only thing you really need to know to correctly specify a bind key is its exact internal name. Most key names can be found on the developer's official Rust Wikipedia, and I've also compiled all of them into a table, which you can find via the link in the description. If you want to bind something to a key combination, all you need to do is list the required keys, separate them with a plus sign, and wrap everything in square brackets. For example, a bind using left control +/ will let you kill yourself quickly, while almost completely protecting you from accidental activation. Once the key is selected, we can move on to the functional part of the bind and choose the actual command. Rust has an insane number of commands, over 2,000 in total. They are divided into server commands, admin commands, and client commands. Server commands are useful for server owners, including local servers. Admin commands are, unsurprisingly, meant for admins and various content creators. And client commands work for absolutely everyone. All 2,000 commands can be found on the Rust help website, but keep in mind that only about 1/3 of them actually work in the console, and therefore in binds. If we're talking about commands that are genuinely useful during gameplay, the number drops to around 150. Out of those 150, roughly half can already be bound directly through the in-game settings menu. That leaves us with about 70 commands that really shine when used in binds. These include things like instantly giving yourself the item you're aiming at, placing a map marker under your feet with a single key press, dropping your backpack, displaying on-screen notifications, disabling rain, and much more. A list of those 150 useful commands is also available via the link in the description. Once the command is selected, you need to understand its values. Commands can be divided into 3 groups. Those that do not require any values at all after them, those that require a true/false value, and those whose values are defined individually by the game. The first group is the easiest. We simply write the command, and it is applied without any side effects. You write kill, the character dies. And that's it. No further changes. You can respawn again and use kill at any time. Accordingly, the same principle works for binds. You create a bind to clear the chat, press it, and the chat gets cleared. Once again, no punctuation marks are required. The second group is a bit more interesting. These commands kind of have a lever that is either turned on or turned off. For example, the God command. The default value of this variable is false, meaning it is disabled. If we enter the command God true, the value changes and God mode turns on. And if we want to disable it, we need to enter God false, letting the game know that the lever needs to be pulled again. These true/false values can be replaced with numbers 1/0. It's exactly the same thing. There is no consistency here. The developers themselves use both. Almost all control-related commands belong to this type. For example, forward movement. By default, it is disabled. But if we specify in the console that buttons.forward is enabled, the character will start moving forward. And it won't stop until we return the variable back to false. But in the game, this works differently. You hold the button, the character moves. You release it, the character stops. So how do we achieve this? It's very simple. A special modifier works with this type of commands. Without a space, we put a plus sign in front of the command, remove the value, and now the action will be performed while the key is being held. It's important to clarify that this trick will only work with second type commands, the ones that can only have true or false after them. All other commands will work incorrectly. By other commands, I mean the third type. These are commands whose values can consist of numbers, text, item identifiers, and so on. The principle here is similar to the second type, it's just that the expected value is more complex and diverse. And most importantly, you need to get that value from somewhere. For example, this long command is responsible for the position of the texture resolution slider. And if you put 0 after it, the resolution will be full. Set it to 1, and the resolution drops to half. And if you set, for example, 3, you'll get the lowest possible resolution. And this is just the beginning, because some commands require several values after them. For example, the give command expects you to specify which item should be given, in what quantity, and to which player. To correctly write this command, you need to know the order of these variables, and the ID or internal name of the required item. Of course, things like this would be much more convenient to do through a proper interface. But this video is for those who haven't downloaded Woodcocker, and want to learn how to create binds on their own. So let's assume you don't have access to this interface. For now, just remember that commands can require absolutely anything after them, including text. By the way, a lot of people stumble on text because text implies spaces, and a space for the game is a separator. If we want to create a bind that outputs the phrase "hello everyone" in chat, we'll end up with just hello, because everyone will be cut off by the space. To avoid this, we need to wrap the entire phrase in quotation marks. Keep in mind that there are 3 types of quotation marks: angled, curly, and straight, plus an apostrophe as well. The game requires specifically straight quotation marks, which you can type on the English keyboard layout by pressing this key. The console won't understand other quotation marks, and the bind simply won't work. The main advantage of binds is that you can bind multiple actions to a single key press. For example, I want pressing the L key not only to change my field of view, but also to turn on the flashlight. I write both commands one after another, separate them with a semicolon, and voila. Now a single key press performs both actions at once. And yes, as you can probably guess, the plus sign before a command will work here as well. I add a plus before the flashlight toggle command, and now the FOV change stays permanent when pressed, while the flashlight stays on only as long as I hold the key. And now, when you think you've got a solid grasp of this topic, it's time to move on to the most interesting part: loops. Cyclic command execution is an essential part of bind functionality. It allows you to create convenient toggles, without which playing Rust wouldn't be nearly as comfortable. For example, with a single key press you can toggle the UI or its individual elements, quickly lower settings before a raid, enable admin invisibility, and come up with hundreds of thousands of other use cases. Here it's important to understand that there are 2 ways to create a loop. The simple one allows you to alternate commands strictly one by one. For example, you want to create a mouse sensitivity toggle, low, medium, and high. You write a bind where you specify the same command 3 times with different values. If you leave everything as is, then with a single key press, the game will instantly cycle through all 3 values and stop at the last one, setting the sensitivity to high. However, if you put a tilde symbol right before the very first command, all subsequent commands will start activating cyclically. The first key press will set sensitivity to 0.1, the second to 0.4, the next to 0.8, and the next one will reset the cycle back to 0.1. And this way you can cycle sensitivity endlessly. This is a very simple and convenient method, but it has one very serious limitation. Commands inside the loop can only be executed one at a time. And if, for example, you want to not only change sensitivity, but also duplicate its value on the screen, you won't be able to do that using a simple tilde anymore. You'll have to use a complex loop or a grouped command loop. A complex loop is essentially a bind inside a bind, which requires special punctuation and syntax. To understand how this works, let's first take two simple commands that we've already mentioned earlier, God mode and the flashlight. Let's say I want the first key press to enable both God mode and the flashlight, and the second press to disable both of them. I write the first two commands, God1 and light toggle 1, but I don't separate them with a semicolon. The semicolon comes later, and after it we specify the commands for the second stage of the loop. In our case, these are the same God and light toggle, but with a value of 0. Now we need to indicate that all of this should be toggled cyclically. To do that, just like before, we put a tilde at the beginning of the bind. Next, we need to let the game know that this is not a simple loop, but a grouped loop. For that, we add meta.exec before each group. At this point, everything could technically already work, but the game doesn't understand which parts of this symbol soup are commands and which are their values. And here, quotation marks come to the rescue once again. We wrap each command together with its value in quotation marks. And voila, now everything should work perfectly. The game understands that it's dealing with a loop, and a complex one at that, consisting of multiple actions. The first action is setting the God variable to 1. The second action is setting the light toggle variable to 1. When it encounters the semicolon and the repeated meta.exec, the game understands that the first stage of the loop is complete, and moves on to the second one. And there can be multiple such stages, just like there can be multiple commands inside each stage. But remember how we said that, for certain values to be processed correctly, they need to be wrapped in quotation marks? So what do we do here, when we're already using quotes? For example, instead of turning on the flashlight, we might want to display a notification in chat. Yes, that notification also needs to be wrapped in quotes. And while this kind of input looks perfectly fine to us, the game will interpret it differently, deciding that the opening of the second set of quotes is actually the closing of the first. To avoid this situation, escaping was introduced. Here's how it works. Every time we open quotation marks without closing the previous ones, we need to put a backslash in front of them. The same backslash must be duplicated when closing those quotes. As a result, we get this kind of onion structure, which the game now understands how to unwrap correctly. By the way, if you ever need to reset a complex cycle, you can do it with a separate command, meta.reset_cycle_x, where x is the key the cycle is bound to. And of course, resetting a cycle can also be assigned to a bind. There are plenty of use cases for this. For example, I have this bind that toggles admin time on the server and displays its state in a notification. But if I want admin time to be completely turned off and the cycle to be reset, I can press the key that toggles this time while holding shift. If you're curious, on paper these two binds look like this. One more unanswered question. What if we want to add a hold function to a command that doesn't belong to the second type? For example, I want my FOV to decrease while I'm holding a key, and then increase again when I release it. Right now the community uses this plus-based method for that, and it does work. But from the handler's point of view, it's incorrect. In simple terms, it's a workaround, and if we look at the console, instead of changing the FOV twice, such a bind actually changes it 3 times. So instead of wasting time building cause and effect chains, let me just explain how this case should be handled properly. And for that, we have conditional modifiers, meta.if. Their syntax is somewhat similar to meta.exec, but the purpose is completely different. They're used to assign different functions to a key press and a key release. For example, I have the same FOV bind, where I want pressing the key to lower the FOV to 70 and releasing it to raise it to 90. For the press, I'll use meta.if_true, and for the release, meta.if_false. And since this is a meta-level construct, just like with complex cycles, we'll have to wrap our commands in quotation marks. The result is a command that the engine reads like this. When the mouse 3 key is pressed, the FOV value changes to 70. When that key is released, the FOV value changes to 90. In the end, we get that same zoom effect. But as you can see in the console, it works correctly and switches the field of view exactly twice. The most important thing you need to know about binds is how to properly save and delete them. Binds are saved automatically and appear in the config file right away. However, if that file is locked for some reason, or you have permission issues with the folders, your control settings may reset or fail to update. Open the game folder, find the .cfg directory, and make sure you can edit the keys.cfg file with Notepad. If you want, you can write the binds you need directly into that file and save it. Just make sure Rust is closed at that moment. If the game is running, then enter your binds through the console and afterwards save the config with the global.write config command. Deleting binds is, in fact, not strictly necessary. Instead, you can simply write a bind for the key you want to clear and put any kind of nonsense there. Yes, every time you press that key, the game will try to understand what that nonsense means, but you'll never even notice it. Commands like unbind, rebind, bind clear, and similar ones do not properly clear a bind. And if you really absolutely need to remove a bind completely, there are two ways to do it. Either manually, by deleting the corresponding line from the keys.cfg file, or through the in-game menu, by binding any action to that key and then immediately unbinding it. The topic of binds is endless, and despite fairly strict syntax rules and a high level of documentation, players keep running into problems when writing binds. Control settings don't save, they reset, something breaks, and recently the input.bind command, which had always worked before, stopped functioning correctly. Long story short, I tried my best in this video to cover as much information as possible and lay it all out in a way that's absolutely clear for everyone. This brings my guide to an end. Huge thanks to my patrons for sponsoring these videos, making it possible not only to explain the finer details of the game, but also to launch projects like Woodcocker, which in just a couple of months gathered an audience of many thousands and hundreds of thank you messages. Thanks for watching and see you in the next videos.